737 vanishes from radar over one of the most remote jungles on Earth. The crash pushes investigators to the limit.
On the first day, we had 8 snake bites, 3 broken legs, and 1 cardiac arrest.
It's the worst accident in the history of Panama.
Commercial aircraft just don't fall out of the sky.
Dark theories emerge.
Drug-running airplanes out there.
What about a bomb?
They saw a big ball of fire.
It was highly suspicious.
An entire nation is demanding answers.
We had this massive spread of parts that made no logical sense.
Copa 201.
Only one stunning conclusion can explain it.
It was a big surprise to everybody.
Come on! I'm throwing something!
Mayday, Mayday.
Tocumen International Airport in Panama City.
V1.
Copa Airlines Flight 201 takes off for a short flight to Cali, Colombia.
Rotate. Gear up.
Captain Rafael Chial is Copa's most senior pilot. Today, he's monitoring the instruments.
Set thrust to climb.
First Officer Cesario Tejada is flying the plane. 40 passengers are on board, mostly business travelers heading home to Colombia. The flight usually takes about an hour. But tonight there's a hitch that could add some time.
We've got some heavy weather moving in from the Gulf.
Flight 201 is heading straight for a storm.
In Panama, out over the water, 8 to 10 miles out, because the Gulf's there, there's a lot of convective activity and thunderstorms.
The weather was unusually terrible. It was a storm, big storm.
It looks like we're going to have to take the long way around.
Mm-hmm.
If you fly through a powerful thunderstorm, there's up and down drafts, you can overcome the airplane. So you don't fly through them.
It looks clear to the east.
The pilots need to find a way to fly around the bad weather.
Agreed. I will let them know what we're doing.
You look at the weather and you decide if you can do it. If you can't, you ask for a vector around the thunderstorms.
Panama Center, Copa 201. We'd like to get around this weather, requesting a new heading for 090.
Copa 201, copy that. You're cleared on a heading 090.
Cleared, heading 090. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a short detour to avoid some bumpy weather. It may delay our arrival in Cali. I will keep you posted.
The new flight path will take the 737 east around the storm before heading south again to Cali.
Panama Center, Copa 201.
It's been 12 minutes since takeoff.
Level at 250.
The captain tells controllers he's reached cruising altitude, 25,000 feet. Minutes later, the plane disappears from radar. The controller tries the radio, but gets no response.
If you're close to thunderstorms and in a lot of rain, there'll be static on the radio. And sometimes you may not be able to talk to them for a few minutes.
Graciela Ocaña is one of the controllers on duty.
The flight was leaving Panama airspace, entering Colombia airspace.
Hopefully it's just interference from the storm.
When the signal disappeared in the radar, I was worried what happened.
The plane's last known location was over Panama's remote Darien Gap.
Their last radar return was here, over the Darien jungle.
The plane has vanished over an almost impenetrable jungle. If Copa 201 crashed here, just getting to the crash site will be a huge struggle. Ocaña reports the missing flight to aviation authorities.
Hey, have you had any radio contact with Copa 201?
Then comes the news she's been dreading.
Early in the morning, I received a call from a radio station in Darien.
Any survivors?
Witnesses on the ground have reported a terrifying sight.
During the night, they saw a big ball of fire falling from the sky. We had to find out where the aircraft was and if there was anyone alive they could save.
The next day, searchers make their way to the crash site. But all 47 people on board are dead.
Even if it's one person, it's a big loss. And it's a plane full of passengers. It's really terrible.
In Panama City, air crash investigators set up a command post at a local flight school. Panama's Deputy Director of Civil Aviation, Jorge Rodriguez, is under enormous pressure to figure out what happened. The loss of such a large aircraft has left his country in shock.
At that time, it was the first big accident of an air carrier of Panama. We lost 47 people on board, all dead.
The bad weather leads to immediate speculation that the Copa pilots may have been overcome by a deadly storm.
They reported a nasty weather in the Gulf of Panama at that time.
I'm on any weather dive for this entire area.
In the Darien province, Panamanian firemen say a prayer for the 47 people who died aboard Flight 201. The search to understand why they died brings NTSB investigator Tom Houter to Panama City.
There's a lot of pressure to the NTSB in all investigations to determine the cause of the accident. That's what we do. So certainly we want to know what happened, why, and we want to prevent another accident. That's our main mission.
Tom Houter, NTSB. How you doing?
But there is added pressure on Houter because of the type of plane involved in the tragedy, a Boeing 737.
I'd really like to get a look at the rudder on this one.
The rudder is a critical control surface in the tail that helps to turn the plane. The NTSB suspects a rudder failure caused the recent crash of another 737, United Airlines Flight 585.
He had previously had an accident with a 737 in Colorado Springs. It was on approach when it suddenly rolled over and dove into the ground high speed, killing all on board.
A possible connection between the two crashes makes it critical to figure out what brought down Flight 201.
Because that was an unsolved accident, we were very anxious to know, is there other evidence out there that would help us solve that case?
If rudder failure brought down both flights, there could be a fatal flaw in every 737, the most popular commercial airliner in the sky. Passengers all over the world could be at risk. In Panama's Darien province, investigators begin the painstaking task of trying to find all the wreckage of Copa Flight 201. The dense vegetation makes it almost impossible to spot small pieces from the air. The team must search on foot with the help of local guides.
It wasn't laid out as we normally see in a crash where the airplane comes in and, you know, here's the nose, here's the center section, here's the tail. It turned out there were like parts all over. And so we're trying to determine where they were. And so it became just a major search.
They need to find as much of the plane as they can, but they quickly realize it's going to be a daunting task.
The Darien jungle is probably the remotest section of Latin America you can think of. The Pan American Highway does not go through there. There are no roads. There's just nothing.
It's like one of the worst jungles in the world. I probably saw insects that National Geographic hasn't even seen yet. It was just very tough.
On the first day, we had 8 snake bites, 3 broken legs, and 1 cardiac arrest.
As they work, they map the location of every fragment of the plane. Tracking where the pieces landed could hold clues about why the plane crashed. Most of the pieces are small, but a trail of scorched vegetation leads to the first large piece of the plane.
There was a large cleared out area that actually, there was a lot of fire that took place from the fuel.
This is the center section of the wing. The main landing gear is right there below you. The other piece is just down the hill.
It's an important find, but many more parts are still missing, including the rudder and the cockpit. The wreckage is spread across more than 100 square miles. For investigators, the large area is a critical clue.
Clearly, there had been some type of high-speed event where the airplane had broken up and basically just rained parts down on the jungle. The cause of the breakup we didn't know, so we have to take a look at the wreckage and try to determine how all these pieces of the puzzle fit.
The crash site's proximity to the Colombian border suggests an obvious theory.
It's a narrow corridor for drugs. It's a busy one.
The Darien jungle is right on the border between Panama and Colombia, and there was a fair amount of drug activity coming back and forth across the jungle.
The remote jungle of the Darien Gap is a haven for drug cartels flying illicit merchandise north from secret airstrips.
In that time, we don't got no radar that is going to patrol the route of the drug smuggler.
Drug runners usually fly at night when they're less likely to be spotted.
Panama Center, Copa 201. We'd like to get around this
Weather requesting a new heading for 090.
Unlike commercial crews, smugglers avoid radar detection by switching off their plane's radar transponder, and they never check in with air traffic control.
If he does not report, who will know that they are there? It's really dangerous, especially if there is not good visibility.
Cleared heading 090. We'll let you know when we get clear of this weather.
Perhaps the unsuspecting pilots suddenly crossed paths with drug runners. It would have been the last thing they ever saw.
We thought of, drug running airplanes out there, something else going on out there. Everything was open for consideration.
If Flight 201 did hit another aircraft, investigators should be able to find some trace of the second plane among the wreckage they're pulling from the jungle.
If a red airplane hits a blue airplane, the paint's going to transfer, you're going to get a little bit of one on the other.
They scrutinize each piece carefully, hunting for any speck of paint that could have come from a covert drug plane. But they come up empty. Even more telling, there's no wreckage that could have come from a second plane.
We didn't find any other wreckages, old or new. And looking at the wreckage we found from the Copa airplane, we didn't find any evidence of a mid-air collision.
There's another possibility.
What about a bomb?
Flight 201 was bound for Cali, Colombia, home of a violent drug cartel. Investigators know that a bomb on board could explain the eyewitness reports of fire in the sky.
Certainly we're interested in the possibility of an explosion. We brought an FAA explosive expert with us. It's a possible bomb went off and caused the breakup of the airplanes, it's possible for something else. We needed to take a look at everything.
Commercial aircraft just don't fall out of the sky, so those individuals putting the team together felt that it was highly suspicious and might be something in my area of expertise.
Explosives expert Calvin Walbert begins his search for evidence of an onboard bomb.
There's a tremendous amount of pressure because everybody wants that answer yesterday.
He's looking for signature blast marks caused by the superheated gases from an explosion.
There's indicators that you look for that will tell you that this is caused from an explosive event. It's not caused from just, a fire or fuel erupting or something like that.
If there were a bomb, the telltale marks will most likely be found on metal debris.
On something like aircraft aluminum, you would be looking for pitting and cratering, kind of like the surface of the moon.
He carefully examines each piece. He finds burn marks, evidence of a fire, but there's no sign of an explosive detonation. The bomb theory is looking less likely, but it can't be ruled out completely until they carry out one final test. The dead are airlifted to Panama City, where the bodies will be X-rayed to check for embedded shrapnel.
I'm looking for something that would be foreign to that human remains that is not part of the aircraft, that is not part of their personal effects, that it is something that would indicate that it was a bomb.
Base camp, come in.
A call from the jungle search team brings some much-needed good news.
We've got the black boxes.
The exhausting effort has paid off. They've found Flight 201's black boxes. This could be the breakthrough investigators need.
At least we got something to analyze what was the cause of the accident. Without those boxes, you're blind. You don't got nothing.
There's no lab in Panama equipped to analyze the recorders. They need to go to the National Transportation Safety Board in Washington.
We're anxious to look at the flight data recorder. The flight data recorder was the only data we had from the flight itself up to the time of the breakup.
NTSB technicians work quickly to download the information stored on the two recorders. The flight data recorder tracks information like airspeed and heading. The voice recorder captures the sound of the pilot's conversation in the cockpit.
We were hoping with the cockpit voice recorder, we'd get more information in terms of what the crew was saying, what was happening, right at the time of impact.
The flight data recorder is in good condition. But the same can't be said for the voice recorder.
It was a big surprise to everybody.
Somehow the tape has snapped and come unspooled.
My God, what a mess.
The surprise was the tape was broke completely, like a black spaghetti.
You just had a ball of Mylar tape.
Investigators won't know what answers the tape holds unless they can somehow repair it.
If the people from NTSB cannot put that tape to work, there was no way.
Battling 120-degree heat in the Panamanian jungle, investigators struggle to learn what they can from the wreckage of Copa Flight 201. Another big find could be a crucial lead in two investigations. They've recovered a key part from the plane's rudder, the power control unit.
The power control unit is a hydraulic ram, if you will, that moves the rudder back and forth.
It's the same part investigators suspect may have failed during the recent crash of a United Airlines 737.
If there's a failure mode out there that's affecting thousands of airplanes, we want to document what happened, work with the FAA and the manufacturers to correct the problem so the accident can't happen again.
If they find evidence that the critical component malfunctioned, it will send shockwaves through the entire industry.
Boeing company will stop all those airplanes. They will not be flying if that was the issue.
Investigators test the mechanism. They need to know if it jammed in flight, a failure that could easily put a 737 into a sudden dive. But it's another dead end.
There was no evidence of pre-existing damage. It appeared to be working normally up to the time of impact.
The team hopes the plane's engines will provide a better lead. In rare cases, turbine engines have been known to overheat and catch fire.
If you got a fire in the engine, it's a lot of things that you can do about it.
If there was an engine fire on Flight 201, investigators should be able to find black scorch marks on fan blades and other internal parts. But again, their inspection turns up nothing.
The engines, there wasn't a problem at all in that flight.
The engines were working normally when the plane broke apart. Investigators are still no closer to understanding what happened in the skies over Panama. Medical X-rays eliminate yet another theory.
All of the victims' remains were X-rayed to see if there's any evidence of an explosion.
The images show no sign of any foreign debris that could have come from an explosion on board.
There was nothing that I saw or that I observed that would indicate to me that there was a device on board Copa Flight 201.
Altitude! Hola! Hola!
Investigators now believe the flames witnesses saw ignited after the plane broke apart. It wasn't a bomb. There's enormous pressure on the investigation. Panamanians want to know what caused their nation's deadliest air disaster.
How could that happen? We could not imagine. We needed the answer.
In Washington, there's renewed hope of finding answers in the cockpit voice recorder. Technicians have managed to repair the broken tape.
Well, it took a lot of effort, but they slowly, found an end and straightened it out, rolled it back up, got it on a reel.
Rodriguez can finally listen to the sounds captured in the cockpit.
Copa 4129, you are cleared for takeoff.
But what he hears reveals a stunning new problem.
Cleared for takeoff, 4129. Okay, here we go.
The recording is not from Flight 201. It's from a flight days earlier. It seems that the tape was already broken when Flight 201 took off.
The tape was broke about 7 days before that accident. And that was the reason that recorder wasn't working at all.
It's very unusual that it does not operate. I flew the airplane for many years. I don't recall ever having the cockpit voice recorder not work.
The first funeral is for one of the 5 flight attendants. Many mourners are asking the same question as investigators. Why did this tragedy happen?
It was like a nightmare that you wish you could wake up. You do not expect that to happen, even less in your country.
The flight data is finally in the hands of investigators. It paints a terrifying picture. Flight 201 suddenly went into a catastrophic dive.
The airplane started coming down from 25,000 feet until he disintegrated at 9,195. 3,000 feet a minute.
The extreme speed of the dive solves the mystery of the mid-air breakup.
It's not designed for flying inverted at speeds approaching the speed of sound. And so we're trying to understand how it got from a level flight to be inverted coming down at high speed. That few seconds is really the focus of the investigation.
The fierce weather over the Gulf of Panama may have been a factor.
We had reports that the storm extended more than 100 miles from east to west.
If the Copa crew flew into a severe storm, there's a chance the pilots were confused by what experts call spatial disorientation.
This is something else. You have a visual reference on your sight?
No. Flying in weather at night, thunderstorms can be totally disorienting.
You can't really trust your own senses. The inner ear will not lead you to the right conclusion necessarily. The G-forces you're feeling may lead you to think you're turning left when you're turning right.
Altitude. But in God's name, pull up! Pull up!
Investigators use radar information captured in the tower to plot Flight 201's path. They want to compare it to the path of the storm.
We could go back and look at the weather data and the long-range radar data. We knew where the storm was. We knew where the airplane was by the impact. And so we could piece together their flight path and where they're going.
The results are conclusive. Flight 201 wasn't anywhere near the storm.
I say that the weather wasn't an issue in that accident.
Investigators still can't explain what happened to Copa Flight 201. They need a better approach.
The data we had, the takeoff, the climb out, the cruise, everything looked like a normal flight.
They delve deeper into the last 2 minutes of flight data and discover some very unusual flight maneuvers.
Okay, looks like they turned right, and then left, and then right again until they spiraled into a dive. Doesn't make any sense.
The flight data seems completely baffling. Could it hold the key to explaining why 47 people died on Copa 201? Investigators zero in on the final 2 minutes of Flight 201.
Let's have a look at this thing.
They create an animation of the flight data,
Everything's normal? That was abrupt?
hoping it will shed some light on how the 737 could have made such strange maneuvers.
Should be correcting, it's not correcting. Whoa, what the heck's going on?
But it only adds to the mystery.
We would start seeing the aircraft, roll over into a bank angle, then suddenly snap back to level or vice versa.
The strange motion is unlike anything an airliner usually does during flight.
I was trying to understand how can the airplane maneuver the way it's doing, and that was causing quite a bit of problems because we couldn't make it fit.
The aircraft is normally flown very gentle, as if your grandmother's in the back and she does not like to fly, because you're trying to make a happy customer and make them come back and fly with you again.
Could the pilots have been incapacitated by drugs or a medical emergency?
We've got to find that cockpit.
There's no way to answer that question unless they can find the pilots' bodies and carry out forensic tests.
So that was one of the main part of the investigation was we have to get the cockpit.
Investigators are prepared for the hunt. Before going into the jungle, they examined a 737 just like the one that crashed.
I thought, we're hunting around the jungle looking for parts and pieces. It might be nice to see what they look like intact. So when we came across them in the jungle, we'd have an idea of what we were really seeing.
The meticulous search finally pays off.
We found the cockpit in the base of the big tree. Like he hit the tree and stopped there.
In Panama City, pathologists examined the bodies.
During the autopsies, we found no evidence of a heart seizure at that time or any medical event with either of the pilots at the time of the impact.
Toxicology tests also confirmed that neither pilot was impaired by drugs. There must be another explanation for the bizarre maneuvers.
We're trying to understand what happened here that caused the upset. It was quite a mystery for a long time.
With little else to go on, investigators focus on the cockpit debris. It provides some intriguing details about the last moments of the flight.
We started to be able to piece together what may have been going on in the cockpit at the time this happened.
The delicious food makes up for the long hours.
First officer's flying the airplane. The captain is back from the controls. He's having his meal, and everything seems like a very normal flight when things started going wrong.
Investigators study the flight instruments and cockpit controls that pilots rely on to fly the plane. The position of a switch raises an immediate red flag. The vertical gyro switch affects the most important flight instrument in the cockpit, the attitude indicator.
V1, rotate.
Each pilot has his own attitude indicator. It shows him how the plane is positioned with respect to the horizon.
The pilot's attitude indicator is like a ball. It shows bank angle, it shows pitch.
It's the sole control of the aircraft, and without it, it would be very, very difficult to fly the airplane.
Each attitude indicator is connected to its own sensor, called a vertical gyro, or VG. The gyros constantly measure the plane's attitude. If the gyros don't match, the pilots get a warning.
Normally, you'll have the captain's attitude indicator powered by one gyro, and the first officer's attitude indicator powered by another gyro.
If there's a problem with one gyro, the pilots can switch both indicators onto the other one.
If one gyro goes bad, you don't want to have the pilot looking at bad data, so you switch them both over to the good data.
It appears that's what happened. The gyro control switch has been positioned to feed both indicators from VG1, the captain's gyro.
Looks like they're having trouble with the first officer's gyro.
Both of them were reading data from the same gyro source, which makes you think that at some point, either it was selected that way or they didn't realize it's been selected that way, but they're both feeding data from the same source, which is unusual.
Investigators could be on the verge of an important breakthrough. But they won't know for sure until they can test the flight instruments for any kind of malfunction.
We basically removed all the components from the cockpit and shipped those back to the U.S. for examination.
This could be their last chance to understand what happened to Flight 201. Investigators need to know if a faulty cockpit instrument was giving the crew of Flight 201 misleading data about the position of their plane.
Okay, fire it up. What we wanted to look at was, is there anything here that would show us what happened? Is there a failure in the gyros, or maybe the failure is actually an attitude indicator?
They test the displays and the gyros that feed them.
Well, this one seems to work fine.
There's nothing wrong with the first officer's instrument.
Let me see the other one.
They run the same test on the captain's attitude indicator. At first, the captain's instrument seems fine too.
We put them on a bench, we could power them up. They actually work quite well.
Then, they notice something odd.
Hang on, it seems to be stuck.
Occasionally, the display momentarily freezes in place. The attitude indicator stops moving, even though the gyro feeding it is still in motion.
Yeah, there it goes, now it's working.
Investigators need to know what's causing the failure. They test every wire connecting the display to the gyro.
Oh. No wonder.
Finally, they find the culprit.
This wire is hanging by a thread.
We found basically a break in the wire. It was intermittent. It was close enough that sometimes it would touch and sometimes it wouldn't.
The discovery gives new meaning to the bizarre rolling motion captured by the flight data recorder. The captain's instrument and the flight recorder are both fed by the same gyro.
The way the airplane is wired is what the captain is seeing on his attitude indicator is what's being recorded on the flight data recorder.
Since the captain's gyro was broken, it was sending faulty roll data to the recorder. Copa 201 didn't really make any quick rolling maneuvers at all.
Okay, let's see what the plane was really doing.
By carefully analyzing other parameters on the flight data recorder, they managed to calculate its actual movements and reveal the plane's true motion.
Making a visual of it where you could see what the data is showing and what the airplane's doing, that visual is extraordinarily helpful.
The red image shows the bad data the pilots were seeing, while the solid image shows how Copa 201 was actually flying.
They're trying to level the plane, but they're making it worse.
You have the attitude indicator here stuck, now but the airplane's going the other direction. And then suddenly the attitude indicator gets power to it, unsticks, it goes back and mimics the airplane again.
The pilot's ability to troubleshoot the problem was likely complicated by the intermittent nature of the failure.
Go right. You need to go right. I am. What's it doing?
If they're totally confused, by their attitude indicator, they are making improper control inputs.
When it sticks, the pilot's trying to correct that problem. And so he's trying to get the airplane level again, and he doesn't realize that all he's doing is making the problem worse in the wrong direction. He's looking at an instrument providing bad data, and unfortunately, in the period of time, he lost control of the aircraft.
The plane rolls so far to the right it becomes unrecoverable. Though the pilots don't know it, they're now falling from the sky.
Once I got to this point, they didn't have a chance.
But a puzzling question remains. It was the captain's gyro that failed in flight and started sending bad data. So why did the pilots select it?
So the question is why they believed the captain's gyro was the good one. Why was it switched to that position?
Because of that mistake, both pilots were seeing the wrong information.
The accident wouldn't have happened had they been on VG2.
What could have led the pilots to make such a lethal error?
You want to know how are they trained for unusual events? What's their level of skill? How would they handle unusual situations? Are they trained for gyro failures?
Okay, let's start.
Investigators go into the type of flight simulator the Copa crew used for their 737 training.
Climb to 25,000 and turn right.
They recreate the flight of Copa 201.
Now, trigger the failure.
Including the malfunction of the captain's attitude indicator.
Now, how'd you make the switch? Wait a minute, let me see that. That is not the same switch that was on Copa 201.
Two different configurations for one small control switch has overwhelming implications for the investigation.
This is the gyro switch from the simulator where the captain was trained. Next slide, please. And this is the gyro switch from Copa 201. Now, can we get a close-up, please? All right, now let's see both. Wow, that's completely different.
The cockpits, the simulator were dissimilar, and so it's possible to get confused thinking you were going to independent gyro source when you weren't.
In the simulator, flipping the toggle to the left switches the captain's instrument to an auxiliary gyro, independent of the other two. On Flight 201, flipping the switch to the left puts both instruments on the captain's malfunctioning gyro.
Panama Center, Copa 201. Level at 250.
Roger that, 201.
With no voice recording from the cockpit of Copa 201, investigators will never know for certain who flipped the switch the wrong way. But they've finally collected enough evidence to build a compelling theory of how the flight went so horribly wrong.
Turning right, heading 160.
After diverting around the storm, the crew of Copa Flight 201 needs to turn right to get back on course.
The delicious food makes up for the long hours.
Well clear of the storm now.
As the plane levels out, an error flag warns there's a problem with the captain's attitude indicator. They fall back on their training and flip the gyro switch to the left, thinking they're switching to the auxiliary gyro.
You may revert to your training and do something inappropriate because that's what you're trained to do.
Now they're both on the bad gyro and neither of them knows about it.
That's weird. Why won't he level?
The gyro malfunction causes the autopilot to switch off. First Officer Tejada must now fly by hand. He turns his wheel to level the wings. His frozen instrument makes it look like the plane isn't responding, so he continues to turn the controls, sending the plane further and further to the left.
He's trying to correct a problem he's seen on his instrument. He's taught, follow your instruments, believe in the instruments. He's actually making the problem a lot worse.
The pilots have no way of sensing their error. It's too dark to see anything outside that could help orient them.
In the middle of the night, you don't have the horizon. You lose the horizon, you don't know where you are.
As the short circuit cuts in and out, the instrument starts working, then suddenly stops again.
Go right, you need to go right. I am. What's it doing?
Now he sees a left bank, so he's trying to correct it by banking right.
In the cabin, there's little sign of trouble.
The barrel roll maneuver was fairly smooth. There was 1G. So I doubt the passengers really realized the impending danger until the airplane was essentially inverted and started to come through, and then it would have happened very quickly.
Altitude. What in God's name? Pull up, pull up.
In between the two pilots, there's a third standby attitude indicator, fed by its own independent gyro. By comparing the two main indicators to the standby, pilots can quickly determine which one of the main indicators is faulty.
The standby attitude indicator should have given them the correct indication.
Why the pilots didn't use the standby remains a mystery.
Had they looked at the standby and it was said there's something really wrong here, that just didn't happen.
By the time the pilots realize they're in a dive,
Left! I'm trying, Captain!
it's too late.
It'd be extraordinarily disconcerting. You've gone from a few degrees to the left to multiple degrees to the right. It was like, what's happening here?
Once unusual attitudes get out of hand, they're much more difficult to recover from. This airplane got so nose low and at such a high speed, I can't imagine in the cockpit what was going on.
In seconds, massive G-forces incapacitate passengers and crew.
I think I have it, Captain. Oh, God!
As the airplane gets faster, now components are being overstressed, and you'll start breaking off parts of the aircraft.
In the dive, the airplane caught fire because of rupture of the tank and explode.
We're so sorry that the end was the worst.
It's the worst accident in the history of Panama, and I hope we never run through one again.
Jorge Rodriguez spends months helping prepare the final report on Copa 201 for Panama's Civil Aviation Authority.
It's very important that you analyze and find out what was the cause of the accident.
Copa Airlines responds with a major overhaul of its fleet, standardizing the layout of cockpit controls.
Their fleet is fully harmonized. It's a completely different airline than it was at that time.
Copa also revamps pilot training to make sure its crews are prepared for any instrument malfunction.
I flew 4.5 years with them, and their training is the best I've seen. I really respect them for that.
For the airline industry, Copa 201 is a reminder of how even small problems can result in catastrophe.
A minor flaw can result in a tragedy. And so we have to always look for these flaws. We have to train for them. We have to, every day, challenge ourselves to be the best. Whether it's the guy who makes the component on the bench, to the people who maintain the aircraft, to the pilots, it takes everybody working together.